called the Language Institute. I'm proud to say I'm the coordinator of the program and also a teacher of the social science classes and a special elective called acculturation. And during this presentation on how we serve this demographic of English learners, I will also compare and contrast how my school and school district serve long-term English learners at the same time. Back in 2007, I was really excited when I was asked to join a committee of English learner teachers, counselors, site administrators, and district level administrators who were basically analyzing data and trying to find an answer to the question, why aren't our English learners successful? We did not have good results from standardized test scores. We did not have good results for high school graduation in comparison to other subgroups. And overall, not enough English learners were reclassifying English proficient. So our committee looked at data of all English learners in our school district, which has a population of approximately 30,000 students between the grades of 7 and 12. To come up with a plan. We basically wanted to make sure that once this plan was implemented, we would see instant results and better data. Part of our committee's work was obviously doing research, reading, but in addition to the outside research, we were also fortunate enough to be able to travel to other school districts that had versions of EL programs we might be interested in cherry picking best practices and ideas from. And in addition to our readings and then our travel, we were also fortunate enough to hire Dr. Lori Olson, who would Skype in and walk us through some really insightful discussions when we were basically analyzing what we'd heard and what we'd seen and helped us apply it to our actual student population. As a result of the committee, we realized that 80% of our English learners, which is a very broad generic category, were actually long-term English learners. They had been in U.S. schools 5 years or more, and for a variety of reasons were not succeeding, were not reclassifying, and were not getting the grades comparable to their peers. So we developed a plan that would be at every high school. We have 8 comprehensive high schools to give them access to grade level college preparatory curriculum and then some additional elective classes to help support them with their academic language. Like I said, that program is at every single site. What was different and unique about the other 20% of English learners, so those would be newcomers to the United States, less than 4 years, was that they obviously were the minority of English learners, but just based on perception, most people blamed them for the scores of English learners. And when really looking at it, we realized that by having these groups together before the committee got together, we weren't serving either population. Long-term English learners were not being challenged because their teacher was trying to meet the needs of the newcomers, while the newcomers weren't getting the curriculum or the intensive instruction they need to learn English in a very short amount of time. So from that, the Language Institute was born. So in 2009, we opened our doors and we bused all newcomer English learners that would normally go to one of our 8 comprehensive high schools to one site. As of now, we have approximately 180 students that are part of our program. As you can see by this list of nations, even our committee was not aware of how diverse our community is. We are in the Central Valley of California. We are relatively close to San Francisco, and we do know that there's variety of immigrant populations there. They had a special program we visited, but we had naively thought that the majority of our students would be native Spanish speakers. As you can see, we do have a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, Mexico being the country that provides us the most students, but we have a variety of other Spanish-speaking nations that are also part of our program. Another factor that we had not considered in the research phase was that Modesto was going to be a major resettlement hub for Iraq War refugees. We quickly realized that we had a lot of research to do and reached out to the community, and the community said, well, you tell us what you're doing because we're struggling to meet their needs too. So we have developed some very deep relationships with World Relief, for example, who's the resettlement agency that works with the United Nations to resettle these families in our community to help meet the needs of this latest refugee population. You can see that the majority of our students were in a different Middle Eastern country while waiting resettlement for some, pretty formative years of their life. And so we found patterns where if a student came to us from Jordan, they would usually have very little gaps in their education and were exposed to top-notch teachers and classrooms. But if they came through Syria, that wasn't the case. So we've definitely developed a pedagogy to meet the Iraq War refugees' needs. If you look over here on the side, you see we have a variety of Asian nations that are contributing students to our program, a few countries from Africa. Our latest refugee population has been from Afghanistan, and just this week we received our first young lady from Syria. And we have been in communication with our resettlement agency, and we know more are coming. So we look forward to meeting their needs and doing research like we did for the Iraq refugees. Of these groups, 16 different native languages have been represented within our program, and of course a wide variety of exposure to English, many none. And so even though we had separated the newcomers from the 80% long-term English learners, we quickly realized that that wasn't enough. Through trial and error and just a passion for wanting this program to be the best it possibly could, we had a lot of meetings, and we realized that our students, we saw patterns, and we needed to adjust to recognize those patterns in both our master schedule, the classes that we offered, the curriculum, and then our cultural pedagogy. So just like really any school probably in any country, geography matters. You're going to see patterns between urban and rural students. Whereas in the United States, often it seems that our urban schools might be the ones that aren't as successful, but on the extreme, the private schools are doing well. Most of our urban students from foreign nations come with better academic skills and foundation than the rural students do. In fact, we found that many of our students living in a rural environment might not have had formal education, or if they did go to school, it was a room with some books, but there wasn't a lot of instruction going on. So knowing what part of the country they came from was something that we integrated into our intake interview process. Just like American students, economics matter. The majority of our students are coming from a low socioeconomic background, and with that, the marginalization and disenfranchisement they suffered in their own country is brought with them. So we have to make sure that we're constantly making them aware of the opportunity and a good, solid education in the United States could be, and that they're not stuck in that social class here. We have a lot of students that arrive at our school with major gaps in their formal education, especially the refugees, of course. Depending on what country they're in, many of them didn't have school at all while they were waiting to be resettled. We also have many students who are unaccompanied minors from Central America who took that trip on their own months. Many of them actually were detained at the border and spent some time in those camps. So as you can imagine, many of them arrive with not only trauma, but gaps in their formal education. So we have to make sure that we have something to offer them and fill in those gaps. So on that note, we kind of coined the phrase digestibility matters. And what we meant by that was we wanted to make sure that our curriculum was age appropriate, because when we didn't have appropriate curriculum, as you see here, inappropriate curriculum, we saw apathy, we saw discipline issues, and as we kind of reacted and reflected on what was causing that, and we've since rolled out classes that better meet their needs, knock on wood, we have very, very, very few problems. And so when it comes to discipline and engagement, so by meeting these students' needs where they're at, again, in an age-appropriate environment, we are seeing that our students are plugging in. When a new student enrolls, now that we have a program that is capable of meeting the variety of needs that our students have, we do a series of diagnostics and interviews to make sure that we give them an individualized schedule that is hopefully going to lead to them mastering English, graduating high school, and transitioning on into whatever college or career pathway they choose. The first test that we use, that I will actually describe in more detail in the next slide, is called the Scholastic Reading Inventory. The students sit on a computer and they read and answer questions. This test calibrates as they respond. It gets harder if it senses that they are understanding and reading well, and it actually goes the opposite direction if they're not. It starts off with a paragraph, and sometimes I see it shrink down to a sentence as I'm looking over their shoulder, and that's a big indicator to me that that student can't read. At the end of the test, they get a number, and that number gives me an approximate grade level. It's called a Legzile number. And the majority of our newcomers are going to test at what we call BR, meaning that they cannot read, and then we place them in classes accordingly. The entire time I do the diagnostics, obviously I do not speak 16 languages, so as I am administering these tests, I am speaking to them in English with good eye contact and trying not to use any words that might be something that they wouldn't be exposed to if they were to have taken an English class in their native language, just to assess their listening and understanding ability. And of course, if I hit a roadblock where I feel like the diagnostics aren't effective because of the language barrier, then I'll call in a student or a bilingual paraprofessional for assistance. We are extremely fortunate to have an amazing support staff. In addition to our teachers, we have bilingual paras who are fluent in Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, both Mandarin and Cantonese, Vietnamese, and I should mention she's from Vietnam, but she actually is conversational in French too. So what we try to do is get a writing sample from our students to see how to, it's very much indicative of their background education, and then get the input from the bilingual para who is qualified to assess it. Math, we make sure that the directions are given to the student in their primary language, because we do not want the math test to be a test of their English ability, but rather their math skills. And we assess for just foundational deficiencies, because we do have one class that will give them the background that they need to plug into high school level curriculum. But if they do have those basic math skills, then we actually mainstream them for math from day one, regardless of English and speaking and reading ability. So it's possible to have a student that can't read at all in a math class mainstreamed for their grade level. Before going into how we divide our students up, I want to review this Legzile chart and also mention that our program is not by grade level, but what we call tiers. So we have 4 tiers in our program. A tier 1 would be a new enrollee at the beginning phases of language acquisition, and then a tier 4 would be a student who is on the cusp of mainstreaming. And it is possible for students to straddle the tiers. In other words, they might have a class that is a tier 1 class, a support elective to build up their English, while they're taking a history class at a tier 3 level. We do definitely like to err on the side of making it more difficult than less difficult, because we always tell the students that if at any time it's easy, we're not doing our job, because they have so much to accomplish in such a short amount of time. It should be extremely rigorous. We analyze data 4 times throughout the year, and if at any time the data shows us that the student is in a tier below their ability, we make schedule change adjustments when the master schedule allows for it, and with administrative approval if it happens to be in the middle of a semester. But really making sure that our students are in the right tier, I believe, is the key to our success. And one of the main indicators for our tiers is this chart you're looking at. This is the Legzile chart that was developed by the Scholastic Reading Inventory, part of Read 180. And the student Legzile is the result of the SRI test that I described to you from the enrollment process. It's going to give me a number that is going to tell me their approximate grade level. So we started using this a few years ago, and this middle column represents the Legziles that we were using up until August of this school year. And as you can see, it was fairly simple in the sense that the range kind of matched the grade level. So I told you that the majority of our students are entering as BRs, beginning readers, which means they don't even have a Legzile to be on the chart. And as you can see, that by the time they graduate, if they're going to be reading at grade level, they need approximately a Lexile of 1,200. So it's a steep hill to climb, but some have managed to do it. But it is our job to make sure that our students leave our program with a Lexile that is going to make them independent and successful in life. We try to always infuse the need for literacy, not just for educational purposes, but life, and try to tie in many real life scenarios of why, as an adult, having literacy matters. So now that we have Common Core in California, you can see that as of 2014, these are the Lexiles that we're using. So if a student is a Tier 1, this is a typical schedule. So these are students that are going to have a Lexile between a BR and a 199. And if we go back to our chart, we see that a 199 is actually anywhere in the range of first and second grade, according to the Lexiles from the past. But now a 199 isn't even on the chart. So these are students that would be reading at what this Lexile chart tells us a kindergarten first grade level in American schools. We call these students our decoders. We have a 2-period ELD block where all the students in this class are either in a Tier 1 or Tier 2 category. It's System 44 Next Generation curriculum, so there's a rotation. Part of the class is spent on software with headphones where their speaking and pronunciation and reading comprehension is being tested and recorded and analyzed. And we have a library time where they're reading and writing with the assistance of a bilingual paraprofessional, and then teacher time where they're actually doing verbal output and conversation and analysis using verbal language. That's 2 periods a day. They also have for their social science class ELD geography, which is language acquisition focused, using a lot of prepositions, analyzing not only maps, but also cultures, and then providing sentence frames and a lot of focus on grammar and proper speaking ability. Many verbal presentations in that class to practice speaking ability at the Tier 1 level. We definitely believe that English learner classrooms should not be a sterile, quiet environment. We have a lot of oral language going on that is both guided and structured and also independent. Math is going to be according to the student level. So I should mention that these tiers are not age specific. We could have a student be a Tier 1 who is a senior and a person be a Tier 1 who is a freshman. And math also is according to student level. So really, math is not something that we would categorize as a tier level class. We've had students arrive, for example, a boy from Iran who was a BR, so definitely in the ELD track for the language-driven content classes like history and like English, but for math he was in pre-calculus. So we don't want to make them, we don't want to categorize them and keep them from accessing what they already know. These students are, changing classes just like their fellow classmates that are not in the program, and so they definitely are getting access to English by their exposure in math. Foundations of Literacy and Acculturation are 2 electives that we give students at the Tier 1 level. Foundations of Literacy is primarily Rosetta Stone, and then again a lot of oral language and projects based on the vocabulary they're learning in all of their classes. Also in Foundations of Literacy we start to introduce writing formats. At that point the students don't have the ability to necessarily write a 5-paragraph essay, but we start to introduce to them and expose to them the difference between letter format and an expository essay and items like that. Acculturation is an additional elective. Oxford Picture Dictionary is the curriculum. So this is language development with words and vocabulary that they can apply in their daily life. For example, in the OPD curriculum, there is a unit on housing, there is a unit on transportation, there is a unit on health, there is a unit on areas of study. These are words that they can actually take and apply immediately. And often we find the families asking for additional copies of the picture dictionary and workbooks for themselves or their family members because they're so practical. We do require all of our native Spanish speakers to take Spanish for Spanish speakers. Many of them do not understand why. I already know Spanish. And of course, we explain that, native English speakers in America are going to be taking English class all the way through college. And the idea is that we want a philosophy of that celebrates literacy, not just verbal communication, casual verbal communication. So in Spanish for Spanish speakers, there's 3 levels, starting Spanish for Spanish speakers 3 would be the beginning level, 4 is the intermediate level, and then the 3rd year they are taking AP Spanish. And quick side note, I'd like to brag about my coworker, because with this demographic of students for the last 7 years, she has a 100% pass rate on her AP Spanish exam. So obviously she should be celebrated. These students should be applauded because they are not the typical AP student. Many of them are coming with those gaps in formal education, or not really even knowing how to read and write in Spanish, and she's getting them to perform at a high level in just 3 years. And of course, everything they learn, everything that is literacy-based or academic in Spanish is transferable to English, which makes the rest of our jobs that much easier. And then we do have a 7-period day where those students are allowed to choose an elective. So they're mainstreamed for PE, or we have electives at our campus like choir, orchestra, guitar, drama. Here we are on the tier 2s, so very similar schedule. I'm not going to go into as much detail since I did on the slide before, but I'd like you to notice that the Lexile range is higher. They are now not decoders, but beginning readers. They're in the same ELD block, but that System 44 software is going to be able to differentiate between a student with a Lexile of, let's say, 250 and a student with a BR Lexile. So as the teacher is working in small groups that are levelized, the computer is also giving them curriculum specific to their level and their needs. And we're also able to loop in curriculum because we receive new enrollees constantly. Our school year is over at the end of May, and I know last year we had new enrollees up until the week before. So not only getting students to progress throughout the year is a challenge, but then once you are progressing and you're peaking, let's say it's April, and you have your student starting an essay, you get a new student that doesn't know how to read. So the software helps the teachers juggle that. The 2nd year of the program, the tier 2 kids are going to be in a Language Institute college prep world or U.S. history class. I teach that. They do get college prep credit, and it is A through G eligible in the state of California. It's very SEDI strategies, very intense. I served students in that class with Lexiles as low as 100 all the way up to 1,000. And so I definitely make some very strategic decisions when partnering students for activities, when practicing either their verbal or their written language so that they can support one another. And also, obviously, I'm infusing not only the language that they need for the content, but the fact that both of these courses are written to assume that they have a background knowledge, that they were enrolled in U.S. schools. And of course, many of them were not and do not know a lot of the things that you would assume a high school student would know. And so I always try to go backwards also and infuse in the items that we would think a student should know. I tease them and say, if Letterman sticks a microphone in your face on the corner and asks you a question, make me proud. Make me proud that you know as much, if not more, than most Americans. The Foundations of Literacy is still here with Rosetta Stone. That elective will not fall off until we get that Lexile up to at least 400. But Acculturation is gone. That's a 1-year class. And so what we do on the 2nd year is cluster our students with the support of a bilingual paraprofessional in CP Earth Science, which is a mainstream course. And the students really like that. They feel that that's very challenging. Basically, the Tier 1 phase that we talked about previously is what we call English boot camp. Sometimes it takes a student a semester in this schedule. Sometimes it takes them 2 years. But once they're at the tier 2 level, you're going to see that some of those support classes start falling off. Again, Spanish for Spanish speakers for our native Spanish speakers, and then the same electives that are very English learner friendly. Dr. Lori Olson in particular recommended drama to practice the oral language component. Our Tier 3 and Tier 4 students are grouped together in Read 180. So Read 180 is Dr. Kate Kinsella's software through Scholastic, which is for reading recovery for most schools. We've implemented as not remediation, but acceleration. And so as you can see, the research that she did told us that a student needs a Lexile of about 400 in order to plug into this program. We have made exceptions for students and put them in Read 180 with lower Lexiles and have never had to go backwards. Most students are going to rise to the occasion. Scholastic tells Read 180 teachers that they're thrilled if a student gains 100 Lexile points in 1 year. That's with a mainstream population. In our program, because we're using it for acceleration, we typically see growth anywhere between 300 to 800 Lexile points in 1 year. So it is offered for 2 years since it's Tier 3 and Tier 4, but that second year isn't required if the data shows us that they don't need it. I should also mention that we do not ever want to keep a student from being eligible to go straight to a university. So if a student has a desire to be A through G eligible, in our state, English learners need at least 3 years of college prep English. So we allow, with a family conference, students to opt out of Read 180 with a Lexile in this range, as long as they are aware that it will be challenging. We don't ever want this to be a jail. We want it to be an opportunity. And on the flip side of that, our students have really bought into our data analysis, and so many of them are giving up electives, and what they're doing is they're building their Lexile up over maybe 1 or 2 years, and then when they feel like their Lexile is high enough, they will go back and take CP level courses such as CP English in order to be eligible for college. Again, we have CP Language Institute Social Science. Again, we're going to have them in their second year of science with a bilingual paraprofessional and clusters of other Language Institute students for support. Mainstream math, sometimes with a bilingual para, sometimes not, but that's based on the specific ability level of the student. Tier 3 kids, we like to coax into drama, even though many are so uncomfortable and scared to death in the beginning. We have an amazing teacher, and 95% of the kids by the end of the year say that's their favorite class, and we've seen direct ties with drama students passing our California high school exit exam. So we like to give that class tremendous credit for the work that they've done with our students. Spanish for Spanish speakers again, and then we also are now moving into more options with electives, such as metal, woodshop, or child development. All of these classes, these electives, require literacy because there's paperwork the students have to sign and contracts regarding safety. And in the child development class, obviously we want them to be able to be verbally proficient when meeting the parents of the students when they're dropped off, and they have to have vaccinations. So for that reason, we hold off on these until Tier 3. And then last, Tier 4, these are kids that are at 750 up to grade level. Again, sometimes they opt to do college prep English. We don't exit them from the program. We straddle them and monitor them, but the majority of kids are going to do 2 years and Read 180. Again, accelerating, not remediating. Sometimes if they go into CP English, then we will still administer the SRI test to them because we want to analyze their data and make sure they're still growing. And if they're not, have a conversation with them about getting pulled back into the Read 180 program. Again, many of our students are wanting to go to college, so that third year they're taking their additional lab science. I wouldn't say we have a lot of kids in chemistry, so we aren't able to give bilingual paras and guarantee clusters, but by that time they don't really need it. Many of our seniors are Tier 4, so they're taking government economics outside of the Language Institute. This is not a class designed specifically for English learners. It's a mainstream course where we do support them if necessary. Again, Spanish for Spanish speakers, student levelized math, and by this time, health and computers are typically classes that students take as freshmen, but because they're graduation requirements in our school district and we do not have Language Institute support in there, bilingual paraprofessionals or specialized curriculum, we save those for the Tier 4 kids because we want to make sure when they take it, they pass it and they get that graduation credit. And then, of course, PE and electives as we see fit. I should also mention that a very unique and special part of our program is the 5th year option. So if a student comes and they have gaps in their education and they have no transcripts, if a student is very low in math and needs extra time, if a student is not proficient enough to pass our high school exit exams, which are required to earn a diploma, they must pass a test in both math and English, or even if a student just wants to attend an extra year in order to become A through G college eligible, we offer a 5th year. So if these 4 slides seemed like an awful lot to slam into 4 years, it can be, and we have a lot of students that exercise the 5th year option. And when the students do that, of course, we're thrilled because it's such an investment in their education and literacy moving forward. But we see that that extra year really increases our graduation rates and entrance into college. So again, like I mentioned before, we're constantly analyzing the data on these students. We use the SRI upon entry and quarterly. For the students at the Tier 1, Tier 2 phase, we use another data piece called the SPI, which stands for Scholastic Phonics Inventory. And so that's showing us growth. When they don't have a Lexile and they keep testing at 0, they were very frustrated. So we were thrilled to be able to show them, congratulations, you've gone from a beginning decoder to an advanced decoder, or wow, now you're a beginning reader. We also have quantile benchmarks for math assessments. Again, we always want to make sure it's not measuring English but math skills, but our math teachers, the mainstream teachers, analyze and make recommendations. Of course, we look at CASE scores. That's our California High School exit exam. We want to make sure that our students don't just cross the stage with a certificate of completion, but that they earn that high school diploma. And so we try to design lessons that give them the skills to help them do that. The California English Language Development Test is an annual test administered by the state. Where most schools use that to drive placement for their English learners, we actually have it pretty low on our priority list because this test is administered in the very beginning of the year. For example, my students took it in August, and so if we're doing our job, then their progress should be happening rapidly. So that score represents who my students used to be, not who they are. And so we like to look at the SPI and SRI data to give us a more accurate pulse of their current level. Of course, grades. We monitor grades because we want our students to be successful, and family conferences, whether it be regarding curriculum, classroom management, support, if there's anything that our kids need. Family conferences and input from the parents is definitely important. All of the things that I showed you in the previous slides are subject to parental questions. We want our parents to be empowered and active in their students' education. So we're definitely open to going outside the box if that's what they see fit. So the results are in. The program has been extremely successful. Of course, while these students are in this specialized program, like I mentioned, there's approximately 180 students in the Language Institute at Davis High School. They're sharing classes with long-term English learners and other students. And so it's wonderful to see them graduate. That's a picture from our 2013 graduation. Our teachers absolutely love these students and the work ethic that they bring to the table. The picture on the right is Spartan Awards. Every teacher gets to pick one student for whatever reason that really stuck out on their mind and give them that honor. And a disproportionate amount of Language Institute students are given that award on a yearly basis just because they really touch the hearts of the teachers in the mainstream world. Cultural celebrations are really important, and now we're at the phase in our program where, for example, this graduate came back to kind of inspire some of our current students. This student was given a district award from the superintendent of Modesto City Schools for all he accomplished after arriving from Iraq. April of his sophomore year, he was able to become A through G eligible and go to a university like this entire group. We called them our Fab Five, the first to be university eligible. We have this young lady from Togo, Africa, who came to us not only an English learner, but with a hearing impairment from a traumatic injury, who was able to succeed and go on to college. And then this special student is Ramza Sampour, an Iraq war refugee who had been without education in Syria for 4 years when she arrived as a freshman in the Language Institute, was able to follow the classes that I described before. And again, as you see, she's over here in our Fab 5 picture, go to a university. And she was recognized by the county for her success. I think most importantly is the inclusion that our program brings. I'm proud to say that Language Institute students share a campus with all other students at Davis High School. I think it's part of their experience. You can see that they very much get into school spirit. I think 90% of the soccer team is Language Institute students, and they wear their green and gold with pride. We visited a school similar to ours in terms of the student population in Oakland, California, but they were a separate campus. And I left there definitely with some ideas regarding curriculum and instruction, but with a real sense that we're doing the right thing by these kids by having them at a comprehensive site and having them be culturally active in the community, in clubs, in sports, and graduating with what I hope is not just a solid education and the literacy skills that they need to go on and be successful in their life, but also a sense of belonging in the greater community and the confidence to plug in and reach their goals. I really appreciate taking the time to hear me brag about this fabulous program, because I love it with all my heart, and these kids, I think, represent what this country is all about. They're the best and the brightest, and I'm also proud of my school district for challenging the long-term English learners to rigorous curriculum and mainstreaming them and not segregating them. So I think we're doing the right thing in Modesto. And if what I just described can help any other school or school district come up with a plan similar to ours that would hopefully equal success, I would surely be happy to help.